Backyard Devotional.
There's an area of research, it's called Q theory. Q theory is the mathematical study of waiting in line, and we experience this almost every single day. Oh, we're at Panera, we're at Starbucks, we're at the deli counter at Publix, we're stuck in our car waiting through a drive-through. All of these are experiences and examples of Q theory. Now, the absolute pros at Q theory are the good folks at Disney. In their own crazy way, they have mastered the idea that people could be happy waiting 40, 50, 60 minutes for what amounts to a 3-minute ride. So through the use of animatronics and multiple video screens and people dressed up in costumes, Disney mathematicians have come up with a formula that somehow turns a 1-hour wait into something that much of the time feels much, much shorter. And when it works best, it feels like, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. Of course, at the opposite end of the spectrum are the people that work at the return and exchange line at places like Walmart. In contrast, they have mastered the way of taking a 10-minute wait and turning it into something that feels much more like an hour. So there's a story. After the Second World War, there was a burst of economic growth. High-rises were popping up all over the place, which was great, and that was amazing. But after a while, the owners of these high-rises began experiencing complaints. They were receiving complaints. The complaints were over the rush hour delays for elevators. That period of time when people were first arriving for work, or when the day of work was over and they were trying to head back home. So what do you do? Well, one approach might be to add more elevators, but that's horribly expensive and in some cases structurally impossible to pull off. So the story goes that one of the owners of these high-rises in New York City calls upon a guy named Russell Ackoff. Ackoff was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He hears about this problem, and in a stroke of genius, Ackoff suggests that they save their money and instead of adding extra elevators, to simply add floor-to-ceiling mirrors on the walls surrounding the elevators. So they do that, and within a few short weeks, the complaints go down to nearly zero. And the reason why is because Ackoff knew that people like to look at themselves. Now, looking at yourself in the mirror is not the unpardonable sin, or at least I hope it's not. But it does make me think of that statement from Martin Luther from last Sunday's sermon. That idea that the human heart, at its worst, is curved in on itself. That self-centeredness, that self-infatuation, almost as if it is part of our DNA. That thing in us which, again, at its worst, compels us to have a good eye on ourselves, but a bad eye on other people. Seeing this is especially important as we consider this next section of Paul's letter to the Ephesians, this section that will be starting this upcoming Sunday, this part that moves from our union with Christ to our union with one another. This call to unity not only with people who are just like us, but also, and maybe especially, those who are not like us, those who are very different from us. It's that understanding that God's son is my brother and God's daughter is my sister. That our love for the people of God and the proper respect we're to have for them isn't something we simply sentimentally carry around like a campaign slogan, but rather these are things that have to find their application in the real world, an application in our hearts, an application among real people who populate our daily experience. This is something that has to put on flesh. This is something that has to be authentic in each of our lives as followers of Christ. Amen.